All right. Well, good morning. Good last Friday of the month, which means we get to gather for all of those who have chosen to be here for ongoing. And for those joining us for the first time, welcome, welcome. It's always a very nourishing time for me in the month to spend some time with this great community and listen to stories of others as we are on this journey that we call life, whatever that means to us, and as we really think about convening others to create the world we want to live in and not just coexist in. So it's good to be here. We're super glad to have our guest, Jeff Stec, with us. We'll do some formal introductions here in a little bit as we get rolling. So it was good to see some faces coming on here. Wonderful, wonderful. So, yeah, so as we kind of, if you've been here before, you kind of know the drill a little bit. We try to keep some kind of standardization and yet also be open to very shifting things around. But nice. We always have our guest storyteller pick some music or poetry or something to kind of kick us off. So we'll do more of a formal introduction here in a little bit, Jeff. But you can maybe if you can just share with what were we listening to? If you who was the artist and why did you pick that particular song as we start today?
Well, good morning, Jeff. So that was the old 97s. The band Wilco came out of them. And I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. I'll be real quick. So I was walking around at 5 in the morning at a music festival. And when I was 45, and a group of 18-year-olds started saying, who invited their grandfather? And calling, Grandpa, come on over and party with us. And and I knew this song. I said, wait a minute, I've literally been doing this longer than you've been alive. But what I realized listening to the lyrics over the years is, and thinking about today, it's really a call to the adventurous life. And some of you might have been at Maggie Rogers's retirement, and I know Peter and a lot of us have really admired her for taking on the adventurous life and working off of a boat. And there's a lot of ups and downs with that and challenges, but as he says at the very beginning, there's some mysterious drive that puts us on this open road of adventure. So that's why I picked that.
Beautiful. Yeah, wonderful. Great story. The adventurous life. I'm gonna think about that and what that can continue to be. So absolutely. Well, welcome, welcome. Jeff Evans here and co-hosted with Maya Mehta, coming in with you again. So it's good to have everybody here. We will start off with a quick breakout discussion. We always want to make sure we have connection before content. This is about building this community as we have here. So as we build this community of the folks that we see here on the Zoom, just a kind of a chance to connect with maybe folks we know or folks we're just now meeting today. So Maya will be putting us into our breakout rooms momentarily. And the question we'll just continue to utilize is, why did you choose to show up today? Is the key piece. And if you want to add to that conversation, another interesting part of the conversation might be, what did you have to give up to be here today? So just use those kind of two questions as you're in your breakout room. It's always a choice that we have. We have other things in our world. So why have you chosen to be with us today? And if you want to add in there, what were some things you had to give up to be here? Be about 10 minutes, I think, on the timer there, just to kind of get some things rolling. So as we do before in the small groups, listen to understand, no judgment, no advice. Make sure everybody's voice is in the room and gets heard. Be curious to understand. And one of my mentors shared with me, look to see the world through the other people's eyes in this next 10 minutes. So with that, are we ready for breakouts, Maya?
Yep. Just I think there are maybe I don't know if an autopilot is a real person or not. So if you have a small breakout room, just put your hand up and let me know if you're by yourself or anything. Just let me know. I'm doing my best to identify who's real and
It
who's
looks
not.
like that might be Samuel's coming in now. Maybe that's
Ah,
the
there
real
he
person.
is. That's the real one.
All right,
Welcome, Sam.
beautiful.
All
Good to
right.
see you. Thanks, Sam.
So we're headed into breakouts, 10 minutes. The question is, why did you choose to be here today? All right. Well, thank you all again for being here and for sharing those reflections from our moment in connection before content. Always a special time. And never does seem like there's enough time in the breakout rooms. But luckily today we are joined by Jeff Stec. Jeff, like Peter Block, is a citizen of Cincinnati. He lives in Cincinnati and is the executive director of Citizens for Civic Renewal, master facilitator, and is currently writing a book, bringing a lot of this work, including the protocol of connection before content, into the public space and into government. So how do we actually shift that narrative, which has become in so many spaces and ways kind of little toxic? How do we make that much better and rejuvenating? So thank you, Jeff, for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. And to kick it off, I'll ask the question, why did you choose to be on this journey?
Well, let me answer. I want to revise my answer for my small group. Why are you here today? This thing, I said, oh, because Peter asked me. And but a couple things. One is, this is a movement, really. It's a deep cultural movement. And so, oh wait, now I got to change my view. I can't look at my head on the size of the whole screen. Okay, there we are. Good. Okay, my self view. It actually makes a difference. There's a data that shows that 80% of the time we look at our own picture on the screen. And so I tell people, take your self view off, because you can't help. We're all so fundamentally egocentric. So that would have been a nightmare, because I popped and I was my whole head. It's like, no. So it's a movement. And somebody said, every time we get together, anybody with this framework, it puts energy into the movement. I'm in the recovery movement, the AA movement. Every time we get together, just something happens. Even if I don't learn anything at that meeting, I'm getting the energy of everybody else who believes in this, and that metaphysics matters, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, I've already got a page full of notes from a little talk with Jeff, and then the stuff that you guys are saying. I've been doing this for 20 years. I met Peter 20 years ago in Cincinnati, been doing this forever. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent with him, and yet I still wrote down. I've got all my colored pens out. I got 5 different colors already on this piece of paper, right? So just being here and learning is, and ultimately that might be why I'm on this journey. But the larger journey is, there was a breakthrough moment that I had that I don't know if you guys had it too. And it wasn't first with Peter, but I had a moment where I realized I was so in my head. I was a lawyer. Law school didn't do it to me, but man, law school puts you more in your head, more in the thinking, more in the analytical, less with other people, less seeing it from their point of view. And I was at this, actually it was an outgrowth of EST. Peter's friends with Werner Erhard, and he formed EST, and then all these other groups broke off from that, because of course they couldn't get along and decide what they were going to do. And it was very confrontational, be real. And man, I was up in front of the stage, I was on the stage, and I'm just freezing, I'm in my head, and somebody came up and hugged me. I just melted into their arms. And when she left the stage, and then the facilitator said, so basically, what did that mean to you when you got that hug? And I just poured out like a real human being. And he said, y'all see that? Do you see how the light in his eyes? He actually had light in his eyes now. And I was like, okay, that's it. This is my personal journey. And then I show up, whenever it was with Peter. And I had my own experience, but then over the years watched person after person after person get in small groups and go from Robotron walking isolated into a room, and within 1 10-minute small group, they've come alive. They're a real person. And then after an hour and a half, the whole room is alive. And we've got this collective intention that, first of all, is the end state, really. I mean, that's it. And I knew that's what I was going to do. Right. This is what I have to. So that's how I got on this journey.
Love it. And maybe a follow up on that too, Jeff. I think it's your own individual piece through your own individual experience. Was there some kind of elements that said you wanted to take that experience and take it to others? Because I think we all have had our own individual, whether they're transformations or shifts. What was there a choice point as well to, hey, I want to share this or have others experience what I've experienced? Is that something that was present for you?
Yeah. Well, a lot of folks, when they have these transformational experiences, and I'm seeing it in AA, and I saw it at all these EST-like things, when people have these breakthroughs, they literally get religion. And you hear people the day after they've had their breakthrough. So I want to do what you do. Right. Well, wait a minute. You just figured it out 30 seconds ago, right? So there's this grandiosity that some of us get. So of course I had that grandiosity, like, okay, I want to do that. Plus I had, and so this isn't really a choice point. I'm actually saying I had no choice. As a lawyer, right, I was used to being in front of rooms. But with the prosecuting attorney or the other attorney on the other side of a family law or divorce case, ready to, just argue with me and hang me out to dry, it's like, well, that's no fun. But I like this standing in front of the room and getting people talking collaboratively and intimately. That sounds cool. So I was already used to being in front of the room, and the reason I probably got in front of the room is that I come from a show family. My sister was Miss Michigan and was in the Miss America pageant, and I have another sister who's a dancer who was a Radio City Rockette. So, how we look, and as in that song, it says, I'm making a living shaking my ass. There's some element to that. Now, one time Peter chided me. It's like, well, that's one narrative, right? So why don't you get off of that narrative? That's not why you do this. I mean, could be, but but that was, and I wouldn't say I ever consciously decided that, but it just all kind of, why did I want to be in front of the room? That's just sort of where I was destined to be. And then a lot of this work has been how to lose the temptation of being in front of the room, lose being the teacher and be a fellow learner, as Parker Palmer so beautifully writes about in Courage to Teach. Yeah, it wasn't really until recently in sobriety in the last couple of years that I've really gotten I'd had a really bad accident. I won't share it with you, but it was an awful set of reviews from a training that I thought went perfectly because I hit all my marks. And that's what actors say. They hit their marks. I delivered the script and the reviews, and I normally get great reviews, always. It was the only time. And so it was like the pinnacle of ego over service. So it's just kind of interesting. The destiny has to be subverted at some point. It's not just that you teach what you need to learn, you become who you need to be in order to do what it is that you end up doing. And I had to, it took me 20 years doing good work to really figure myself out. And I think I'm at a different place to do much deeper, much more important work now. So anyway, I sort of meander, but thank you for the question.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, you I think already definitely shared some stops for kind of some significant events or mile markers along the way over this journey. As you kind of reflect back, maybe even before that particular experience or others, has there been some mile markers or some kind of events or things that have happened that have maybe caused you to pause? Maybe pause, I'm on the right path, and maybe pause, is anything to cause you to pause as you go on this journey?
Yeah, actually, so I'm from Detroit. Detroit, obviously, like most people know, that it has had some tough times over the last, basically 1967 when the riots happened. My parents, like most other white folks, left the city, though they still mourned the loss of that city. And always brought us back into town. They weren't afraid of blacks. And so we went to the city a lot, whereas a lot of people would say, oh, we're not going there. So I got to see what the remains of a great city, and I just had this sense of loss inside of me. So when I got to Cincinnati, and this place was on the precipice of falling off a cliff, I joined with some other folks this new urbanism movement. We just call ourselves the Urbanists. And it started a lobbyist, very well-known lobbyist, very connected to all the wealthy movers and shakers in town, wrote a white paper, just a couple of pages, but the urban corporation matters, and here's how we solve that. And it was really, we met at a really, really wealthy woman's house up on the hill overlooking the river. And it was just, we were all just sort of talking to ourselves and pushing a set of ideas on people, all very much like a religion. These are the boxes that need to be checked if we want to go in this direction. And he said, well, why don't you start doing your own meetings so that you don't have to always meet up here with us in the big mansion on the hill? And I said, okay, that sounds good. Well, I had a couple of them, and we did some presentations, and we preached the good news. And then I saw Peter he had just moved to Cincinnati, and he did something for the Chamber of Commerce and talked about his stuff. And I was like, this is really interesting. This sounds, I approached him, this sounds a lot like Est and this, possibilities and rackets and all that. And he said, yeah, he sort of said, okay. But he had offered, if anybody has anything in the community they would like me to help with. I said, yeah, I've got this urbanist thing. Why don't you come and do your thing? So he showed up and put us in small groups. We had like 100 people. And then at that moment, we became a movement rather than an advocacy group. Right. And so then every time we met, we would meet in all kinds of different places, churches, bars, office. It didn't matter where it was, always temporary arts center, wherever it was. We always had a little short opening, like we had a law was passed, a charter amendment that said, you're not allowed to pass a law that benefits gay people, right? It was the anti-gay charter amendment. So we had a speaker, 10 minutes on, this is really bad. So, okay, get in your small groups. Talk about why this issue is important to you. Changed everything. And within a year and a half, and Joe Wessels, who's on here, the city pivoted because of the conversation that we changed. Literally, we just changed the conversation. And city council folks and mayoral candidates, and they're like, oh yeah, this means something to people. We need to really do something to transform the urban core. So that just being in small groups once and seeing how that affected people, I saw literally the impact over 18 months at how powerful that was. And that's sometimes people, I don't know about you guys, but they'll push back. Oh, just changing the conversation. What are the metrics? I don't know. So anyway, so that was a big moment for me.
I think we are still haunted by whoever came up with, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, kind of the stuff that's been out there for crazy times, but absolutely. So
yeah.
I am a little curious as well, Jeff, and you mentioned it in the earlier conversations. You mentioned a little bit around, earlier on you were not very connected. And what struck me when you shared that is you shared that you were isolating and isolated. Can you share? That just struck me as can you give a little bit more thoughts around what those words meant or do mean to you?
Well, yeah. So I was in a regular neighborhood as a kid. Had lots of friends. We'd ride our bikes around, big wheels, just like it was before video games and internet. And then we moved out to the woods north of Detroit, like literally no houses around the woods. I took a 50-minute bus ride, slow, but it was all through the woods to go to grade school and junior high. And then I went to a high school that was 50 minutes away, a Catholic prep school. So I was isolated and got used to that, and had a lot of depression issues. And when you're isolated and depressed, they just feed on each other. So then I learned how to become isolating. And I somehow had this pride in, when I was in law school, I went all weekend without talking to anybody. So I got really good at isolating. And when I was at the University of Wisconsin's law school, my first year, we were all thrown in together. I met a ton of people, had a whole community of people, was so happy, no depression. I wanted to transfer back to the Michigan's law school because, it's higher ranked, right? And I chose a ranking over community. And then that's the 2 years of masterful isolating, right? I was not welcomed because, everybody had their friends. And so it was this sort of, okay, well then I'll just run with this isolating thing. And so I've got straight A's. What's she going to do but study? So, loneliness and isolation and depression, they just feed on themselves. And I knew my whole life, like, just force yourself to go to the party and you'll feel better. But it's so hard to do. And so that's why I'm like, when people resist, like, no, I think you're gonna get in small groups anyway. People push back. It's just There is that, and I can't tell you how many people have said, you know, I really was ready to hate this small group shit, but now so I've lived the suburban isolating lifestyle, and it's awful.
Mm.
So I
Beautiful,
guess
beautiful.
that's why I do the work. It puts me I can't avoid community. Well, you still can't, but
And also curious, I'm just from as we all for me on this journey, the pull to go back into this dominant narrative because we are so surrounded by measuring everything and a lot of the non-community pieces. Have you found at times when you might be tempted to move back into isolating, and how do you kind of keep from doing that, or what do you do to kind of continue on this forward journey to convene differently and to move into a community as opposed to isolation?
and you mean me personally?
Yeah.
Because there's that temptation, you know, the client wants content.
Yep.
And it's easy to lose track of that. Well, lose track of the depth of work necessary to get good content and get trapped in the content. But so that's a whole other story. That's
Yeah.
always there. Well, what helps me is to set up times that I have to be there, right? So now I host, or not host, I chair. They call it chair. I've just been really, rejuvenating my meditation practice. It's been 30 years, but it's just exploding in a good way now. And so, I think an AA meditation based meeting would be great. Nobody ever does that, though they talk about it a lot. So if I have to chair the meeting, I will be there every Wednesday at 7. Right. So then I have to do that. I say yes to everything. Like, now, this is in community. So thank God you put us in small groups first, so I feel connected to people. But I say yes to all these things. I'm driving to St. Louis today. So, some of the Cincinnati folks know Angela Pancella. She was here, moved this to St. Louis. He said, "You want to come and give a training, but we can't pay you." It's like, okay. So now I'm in community. So how do I just say yes to everything that puts me with other people?
Right.
So that's my methodology.
Yeah, let's then just pull the earlier one you said about the organizational piece. I think many of us as practitioners, when the client or the other groups are resisting and they're, hey, can't we just go back to the normal? Why small groups? What as Peter says, what results are we going to get, or what are the actions? So when you face folks like that, what is your approach, invitation, anything to help have them consider an alternative?
Yeah, well, just what's out of the blue struck me, which is something I do, but didn't know I did it. And then I'll circle back around to some other ways to do this. But standing in front of the room, like let's say you just submit to it's all content. Okay. Even if you're just facilitating about content, you can always, the principle would be find the issue or the tension and ask about that. Because then they're forced into the underlying stuff. And so this is, I know Peter talks about it in Flawless, right? Resistance is revel in it, explore the resistance. And so, with your client, bad term, but your partner, right? So in a room, you could be talking about content, but wherever the conflict is, that's where the inner stuff's going to be happening. And then it's always about the digging. Why? And so kind of taking that to, it's amazing how good questions and good listeners, I have to take notes about, I'm just learning so much about my own work. So with the client, it's the same thing. Like, okay, well, why do you want that? Well, why do you think that is? What do you think the underlying tensions are here? What is it about your culture? What is it about the people? Do you have any people that are really fighting? Who are you constantly frustrated by? Why do you think you're frustrated with that person? Just look for the resistance. Another way I've said that is, I used this when I was training lawyers in collaborative negotiating. I still do some around. There's a term only lawyers would like, empathic investigation. Right. It's a great way to say, look for the feelings. Right. And the feelings that's where you're going to find the deeper stuff. right? And so that's how, I mean, basically that's just the general. There's all kinds of other, I'm just not coming up with them, but there's a lot of other ways, specifics to do that. But it's looking for the feeling, looking for the conflict, and that's where and that's from there, that's where you can use that. It's like, well, so do you think we need to explore these underlying dynamics as well as get to the answer, or can I throw this idea out at you that to get to these answers, you got to grapple with this underlying stuff. They're usually like, oh, yeah, I think so. So discovering the underlying reality and confronting them with it.
Yeah. What resonates with me on that too, Jeff, and in an earlier conversation you stated, it's how do we as the convener get out of the center as well, right? Because when we convene, there is a little bit of us kicking things. And if I'm not careful, I stay in the center, right? So it's a great way to kind of put it back in the tension in the room as you move through there.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, if I'm ever talking too much, which is a lot, just either ask the whole group a question, or put them in small groups. And I can't tell you how many times I'll just cut myself off and find a way to ask a question. Now, not all of you are going to have that same, entertainer's mentality. So, but for me, I have to be aware of that. And that's the inner game of facilitator.
Yeah, right.
If we don't have our shit together, it doesn't even have to be together. That's not the right term. We just have to be aware of it. And then even our shit is useful in the room. Somehow we'll be able to, it'll give us an insight into what they're going through if that shit gets triggered on us.
Absolutely. So again, it's just a lot of things going through my head, Jeff, as you're talking through. So any surprises, good or bad, on this journey? Things that were like, wow, I didn't think that was happening in a good way. So as you've been on this journey, whether as you're convening or your own individual journey, what have been some of the surprises along the way, as you reflect on your journey?
Well, a couple. The big one is that the work, what I do, what others, it always comes back to the transformational points. It's always comes back to the simplest things, right? So Peter, 6 questions. Yeah, that's it. Connection before content. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's just a handful of things. And I've joked with people, I've found a way to write 120 pages about it. Peter, as you were saying, you've only had one good idea, but now you've got 2 companies and 12 books. But it's kind of true. There really is there's just some foundational stuff. And I have found that I will over complexify everything. The agenda is too complex, right? I overthink myself. I overthink what the problem really is. It's just it's like, no, it's always simpler, always more foundational. Just yesterday, I got 3 pages, like, how am I going to do a training that I've done a million times, but I want to make sure it fits what I talked to them about, and page after page. Then I'm just sitting there after, just came to me. This is it. It was just an unbelievably simple framework. And then all the other details that I had all over these 3 pages, like, oh yeah, so those are going to fit in nicely here. I just asked these 3 questions, and all that detail they're going to come up with. So they're just going to educate themselves. And I don't actually even know what the answers to those are. I have a couple of thoughts, but so that's another thing, is it's the learning is when I allow it to me to be not the expert. Every class, I'm finding now that every time if I'm in the right frame of mind, whenever I go to teach or train, which is such a terrible term, I'm the learner, and putting myself in that frame of mind. I'm just one of, as Parker Palmer says, I'm just one of the people sitting around the fire of the great mystery, and it's dancing in all these ways, and we all see the dance in a different way. When I stop being the one that's dancing in the middle, like literally based on like my family's background, I'm like, wow, we're all just always learning. And then the third thing that surprises me is that the capacity of people to take on the work, the challenge, the vulnerability, the anxiety, And I'm always surprised still that the persons that's, the whole time they're just looking at you. Of course, I, dwell on them. I try to, everybody else says, no, look at somebody who's like nodding and all excited. It's like somehow I can't take my eyes off of the cranky person. Right? Please like me. Half the time they're the one that gets the biggest breakthrough. They're the one that raises their hand, or if I call on them, like they've got something. That's just another thing. It's like, I'm always amazed that the silent person's been sitting on a gold mine of insight. And so, and I know, it's supposed to all be voluntary, but at the exact opposite is true. When it's right, calling on somebody can be amazingly powerful, right? So it's not just volunteer. Sometimes it's actually better to go around the circle, not just allow it all to come in like Peter does, which I do usually. Sometimes it's this other group I've learned that, and they just said, I'm not the facilitator. They like this method. Somebody talks and they call on somebody, somebody talks and they call on somebody. It's kind of like the way of counsel. There's never free flowing conversation. There's never somebody just puts their hand up. It's, I got it. I'm passing it to you. And then we do another round, and then we do another round. And it works great. I would never do it that way, because I like that free, hey, what's coming up, and occasionally call on somebody. But now I'm realizing, oh my God, some of these more rigid structures are valuable depending on the situation. So just the learning, and then how people can learn with me and then take on whatever challenge I put in front of them. It's just incredible that people are really ready for it. And they want to go to these deeper places.
Thanks, Jeff. So you kind of call your work, you name your work, rehumanizing the public conversation. I just love that, how that sounds. And
some people hate it.
I like it.
Really hate it.
I don't know. It resonates with me, and I just want to know, what does that mean to you, and kind of what is your hope moving forward?
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, it's especially in the public sphere, but really it's true everywhere. Human beings, we other people, those people, right? I mean, it really got tight with, Hillary, those deplorables, and Trump, those libs, or whatever awful things he would say. It's always those people. And as soon as we turn anybody into a caricature, and when I was doing this, I learned this from a friend who was a lawyer, but also got a master's in spiritual psychology, or maybe it was spiritual leadership, whatever it was. What we would, if you think of the New York City lawyer, is that asshole from New York, that they're arrogant, they always interrupt you and they overtalk. Well, guess what's going to happen when you show up in New York for a deposition? They are that person. And so the caricaturization, the othering, is a dehumanizing. They don't have needs. As a liberal, progressive, whatever you want to call it, for a while I was like, oh my God, those deplorable Trump voters, they're all whatever, racist, sexist, homophobic jerks. Like, well, wait a minute. They're actually human beings with needs. Like, the Democratic Party turned their back on them, sent all the jobs overseas, and now nobody in their family has they can't even conceive of how to feed their families because they worked in factories like my grandfather did. And they're just bitter that nobody is helping them out or speaking from their point of view. They're not racist, sexist, homophobic assholes. They're people with needs. So when we humanize the conversation, when we get people, there's a lot of ways, that's basically what the safe conversations do, right? And there's another question is, tell a story of how you've lived this issue. Well, then it's a story rather than a series of bullet points. I mean, why are you here today? All these questions are like that. So, but as soon as we rehumanize the conversation, connection before content, then everything goes from there. And one thing that government is awful at is having a human conversation, because it's always about the answer. And they even, one of the worst things is they start with the answer rather than a question. So we figured it out. We just spent the last 2 years researching the answer to a problem that you didn't even get to define with us. So give me some feedback on our answer. Well, then there are those expert, arrogant assholes who didn't care to spend 5 minutes with us what we thought the solution might be before we're kind of stuck with this answer. So the whole government system of expertise and this whole, especially winner take all politics, is one huge dehumanization system. And so since my work, it's really just applying Peter and John McKnight's stuff to this particular government institutional realm. I just wrote a book about that, but it's really, you know, just another spin on what Peter's doing. But that's why I went to rehumanize.
Yeah. And that's interesting because you and Jeff earlier were talking about the ties between Flawless and all of the community work, and that just yells like it's all at the end of the day about collaboration. And how do you actually collaborate with people? Well, you listen first and foremost.
Yeah. There's this really cool model, the 3 practices, and think of, don't compare their worst to your best. That was the one that struck me because the other 2 were similar to what we all do with Peter. But it was the methodology of, it was a room of people, and they say, ask a polarizing issue on purpose. And because people got very dramatic opinions about it. And so somebody gets to talk for 2 minutes. Here's what I want to say about that issue. Somebody can ask a question within 10 seconds. The person has a minute to respond, 10 seconds, a minute to respond. And that's it. You don't get a follow-up. And they don't get more than 1 minute. And it's very rigidly timed, right? I'll never do that. But so everybody talks, so there's nothing other than understanding and then sitting with. But at the end, the whole point is, okay, now we're going to have dinner together with no movement at all toward resolution, because the point is, stay in, this might be one of the practices, one of the 3 of them, stay in community despite your differences. It's the being with. So he put us in this polarized circle so that then we would be forced to practice being with. And I found as a talker, an opinionated recovering lawyer, it drove me nuts to not be able to follow up and say more. And which, of course, duh. But the insight for me was, there's no follow-up question or statement I could have made that would have added any value. Right? You think the next thing, and especially if you keep arguing, it's like, no, a couple minutes and a couple of responses, that's all you got. You really don't have much else to say. And so it forced me just to sit and be with, like, oh, there's a whole lot of other opinions. And so I got my little moment, and then everybody else, I have literally chained or, duct taped shut. And it was so important for me to experience just the being with.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to do with the work.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jeff. And now we have some time to be with each other in breakouts. So thank you. And as we move into breakout rooms, the question is, what struck you about what you just heard? And we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes and have a little bit of a, not Q&A, but a larger group conversation with Jeff in case there's some questions that came up as you were listening to him. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Jump. All right. Opening up.
Any comments or questions for Jeff at this point as we begin to wrap up?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Jeff, I'm a little curious about your AA journey and how, since I have a little background in that as well too, is how receptive folks have been in those meetings to the small group kind of format.
Well, I have not. There's only been 5 or 6 folks that have come to the meditation. Well, no, we had 10 at one, and so I just kept them in a single circle. But I did hear from somebody that in Michigan, they always break people into groups. They give the topic and they do the basic readings at the front, and then they break people into small groups. But they never do that in Cincinnati. So, which then now gives me the green light. If I'm ever asked to chair one of the meetings where there's lots of people, I'm like, all right, other places do this. I'm going to break you into small groups. So
Nice. Yeah.
yeah, they would be open. Well, and it's all about vulnerability anyway, so nobody would resist that. They would be.
Probably like
More people get to share and tell their journey. So that's the whole point of an AA meeting, is to share your experience, strength, and hope. So let's get in the small groups.
right. That's great.
Seth, you were trying to say, we couldn't hear you real well. So let's try your mic again.
Yes, are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I was wondering, Jeffrey, you know, when you do this kind of work, I often come across a lot of internal challenges where I'm recognizing my areas and edges of growth myself. And I'm curious about in what ways you could say you've grown as an individual as a result of this kind of deeply engaged work.
Wow, yeah, that's a really good anxiety provoking question. So, well, I have learned to manage my anxiety, and just be with it. And Joe probably knows, I sweat, and it doesn't matter if I'm in shape or not in shape, skinny or fat. I will just pour in sweat when I'm nervous in front of a room, and I bring towels just to. And I've just gotten used to just go with whatever. I've just gotten used to I've gotten used to being nervous, and so just sitting with discomfort has been a really important skill. And then the other thing is, I used in the anxiety, I would often, not often, but often enough, say, get too much information or be overly vulnerable, or like, well, that's the facilitator shouldn't air out their dirty laundry for the group. Like, oh, I'm doubting what to do right now as a facilitator. Like, nobody wants to know that. It's bad. It's not good if they know that. But there's this edge of being authentic about what I'm experiencing, sort of emotionally, that helps a lot. And so being vulnerable, well, that's the thing out of the bigger thing, being vulnerable with people, I've gone way, I can be vulnerable with more people more often in more appropriate ways. Yeah, so those are a couple of things, but it's a lot. Yeah, thank you. It is, I mean, it's standing up in front of a room if you're not growing personally. That's the other big lesson, is I only get better when I grow personally.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're welcome.
Along the same lines, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about your meditation practice, as that fits into this whole, what you said.
Well, as a facilitator, if you can't spot your own thoughts, you're screwed. You can't facilitate effectively if you can't notice a thought and not get trapped in it. That's just goes without saying. As a human being, you can also say the same thing. If you can't get untrapped by your own thoughts, you can't live. You can't experience reality. You're just experiencing what's in your head. So I've been actually asking people to meditate depending on the situation. If it's a big public government meeting, I don't get people meditating, but pretty much in any other session, I will ask folks, get in pairs, listen. And when you're listening to that person talk about why it's important for them to be here, notice your thoughts. And when you notice your thought, come back to listening. And talk about the distinction between listening while thinking, you're not really listening while thinking, and actually listening. On the personal level, I was doing for years, and 20 years, did transcendental meditation, 25 years, which is a mantra that is actually dissociative. It takes you out of yourself and out of this reality and puts you into the field of all things, or field of all possibilities, as Chopra would say, which is real in its own sense, but it's dissociating from here. So now I do more of a traditional Buddhist meditation through Sam Harris's podcast. And it's really about mindfulness and being full, having the mind full with only what is here. Thoughts, feelings, sights, sounds, what's appearing. And man, that has just changed everything. I'm just way more present now than I could get through transcendental meditation. I'm not criticizing that because it has its place, but certainly taught me how to let my thoughts go. But this is way more empowering to have a meditation, a presencing practice rather than a dissociative practice.
Hey, Jeff, can you put the name of that podcast in the chat real quick if people are interested in look at Sam? It was just a quick, because we're listening. We're
It's his-
going to wrap things up.
Not a
So
political podcast or, you know, semi-cultural political, but it's the Sam Harris, and I can send you a 30-day free, it's the Waking Up app. It's really good.
nice.
Lots of contribute to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome, yeah. Setu?
Yes, I was wondering about how you engage with, you know, when you're working with a group of people and there are a lot of complex dynamics and feelings. People often are speaking from an older, more trauma experienced place, you know, and I wonder when you come across that, or when you sense that there's something beyond what they're saying outwardly, and there's some trauma influence in what they're saying, like how you engage that in a group setting, especially.
Yeah, that can be delicate because diving into their trauma can be more re-traumatizing, more triggering, and then you're down a rabbit hole. One thing that I learned from social workers that do a lot of facilitation is have, I don't say this pejoratively, but like a crying room. Somebody in a room that's going to be there to be with somebody going through really heavy emotions. And so I was actually doing a lot of facilitation with agencies that were trying to implement trauma-informed care. So we'd bring in their people they work with and them and talk about the system. And so that we were ready for people that would really break down. But if it's short of that, I just get curious, right? If I think I can go there without re-traumatizing somebody, I just get tell me more about, it sounds like you're really upset about this. Tell me more about that. Can you give me an example? Like, I try to ground them. You know, give me an example of when this has happened, or why this is why is this important to you? Tell me a story about why this is important to you. So the more I can get them to be present to and concrete with, doesn't have to be concrete, but you know what I mean? Just the more real I can get them, and the less they're in the spinning thought, and more in the, you know, tell me a story about that. Well, that gets them out of this and puts them here. Why is that important to you? Just like all the questions here, what crossroads are you at? A great one to start a meeting was, what do you need to let go of to be present right now? Now, you don't ask that to somebody who's already triggered, right? Because the whole thing, but that's a way to prep people for, and I'm surprised that people get that. Like, what do you need to let go of to be present? That's in the kind of the air of the world enough that folks aren't thinking that's some weird thing.
Beautiful.
Great question.
I know we are beyond the allotted time, so thanks, folks,
sure.
for hanging here. So it's a great conversations. Maya has put a few connecting pieces. If you want to connect with Jeff beyond this conversation, please do stay connected with each other. So with that, thank you, Jeff, for sharing your story and being on this journey. I look forward to more conversations as well, as we are on this journey, and it can be lonely, we know. So reach out to each other, folks, as we continue to learn and develop. Please join us in our monthly storytellers, and I really encourage any of you on here. We'd love to have you be a storyteller. We all have stories to tell, no matter where we are on the journey. So anyone who says they don't have a story to tell, let's have a conversation, because I know we all do in the process. So you should be on the mailing list because you've registered for this one, for future ones. But don't wait a month to convene with others, folks. Convene your own communities, convene your small groups and things as you go forward in your personal, professional lives. As Rick has said in our break, at the dog park, you can convene community as well as other places as you're having conversations. So thank you, Jeff, for being on this journey, and your vulnerability and your authenticity very much as a model for the work I know I'm trying to do in this world. So thank you, partner Maya, and our co-hosting from Portugal today. And the rest of you, wherever in the world, go forth and convene, folks. In spite of what we're hearing around us, this is a good world. We have good people here. So let's be human. Let's bring the humanization back into all of our conversations, folks.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Be
everyone.
well.
feel free to email. I put my email on there. It's just my name, jeffreystec@gmail. So I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Jeff. Appreciate it, guys.
Guys.